In our last lecture we covered the births of both John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. In this sessions we will cover the early childhood of Jesus, which is mostly documented in the Gospel accounts of Matthew and Luke. Though there is not much information regarding Jesus during his childhood years, there are a few events which are recorded which can give us a small glimpse into his early childhood. The first events come by way of Matthew's account, where he tells us about the wise men from the east who are seeking the Messiah. We are not told exactly who these wise men are, but they may have been astronomers or some form of priests who had been influenced by the writings of the prophet Daniel during the Babylonian captivity. They first come to Herod, the one reigning over Judea at the time, and ask him where they could find the king of the Jews. They communicate that they have seen his star in the east and have traveled that they may worship him. Herod, being a ruler himself, is disturbed at this saying as well as those in Jerusalem. This causes Herod to gather the priests and wise men to ask about the birthplace of the Christ. They inform him according to the prophecies, the Christ is to be born in Bethlehem, and from here the ruler should come. Herod then asks the wise men when this star appeared, and sends them to find the Christ, asking them to inform him when he is discovered so that he too could go and worship him. Herod does this so that he may find a way to kill the Christ, presumably to remain on the throne. The wise men leave and are successful finding Jesus, who at this time is most likely under 2 years old. Once they discover him, they worship him, giving him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. During their stay, Matthew tells us that the Lord warns the wise men in a dream that they should not return to Herod, but rather go back to their own land a different way. Shortly after these events, an angel of the Lord appears to Joseph once again in a dream to warn him that Herod means to kill Jesus, and is to flee with his family into Egypt, in which he does so by night and resides there until the death of Herod. This event would be the fulfillment of the prophecy, that Jesus, the Son of God, would be called out of Egypt. Eventually Herod comes to understand the wise men are not returning to inform him where the Christ resides. This causes him to become so angry that he declares all male children in Bethlehem to the coast, who are 2 years old and under, are to be killed. This event would fulfill another prophecy by Jeremiah, in which he declares in Ramah there would be mourning and weeping, Rachel crying for her children and refusing to be comforted. And so, with this event we get a small glimpse into what the family of the Messiah went through, that their child, being known as the King of the Jews very early on, was both an object of hope as well as an object of scorn, and even as a babe his life was sought. But the Lord took care to protect them, sending the wise men with gifts which were likely used as they fled to Egypt. After a time in Egypt we are told that Herod eventually dies, at which time an angel of the Lord appears once again to Joseph in a dream and tells him to return to Israel now that the threat to Jesus is gone. Upon their return, Joseph decides to reside in Galilee instead of Judea, since Herod's son, Archelaus, was now ruling. Joseph decides this after an angel of the Lord appears once again to Joseph in a dream. It is from this point in which the account of Luke's Gospel overlaps, that upon their return Jesus grows and is strong in the Spirit, being filled with wisdom and having the grace of God upon him. The next time we get any look into the early life of Jesus is not until he is approximately 12 years old. During the time of Passover, Luke tells us that the family travels to Jerusalem for the Passover feast, and Luke also tells us that Jesus is 12 years old during this feast. It is afterwards, when the family is leaving to return to their home, that Jesus actually stays behind without their knowing. Seeing that he is absent and unable to find him, his parents return to Jerusalem to seek him out and discover him 3 days later sitting in the temple. Luke informs us that Jesus was actually interacting with the doctors of the religion, listening and asking questions, astonishing those around regarding his understanding. This is particularly interesting because it is normal for children to be taught the ways for their religion at a very early age, but it seems that what Jesus portrays at the age of 12 is on par with those elderly scholars of the temple. His parents eventually question why he had stayed behind and done this to them, causing them to worry, in which Jesus replies, should they not have known he would be about his father's business? At this saying they did not understand, but he returns with them to Nazareth and is subject to them as their son, as Mary keeps all these things in her heart. The last thing we are told about Jesus in his youth is that he continued to grow in wisdom, stature, and favor with God and men. Although there is not much on the events of Jesus' youth, there are a few things that we can glean from Scripture during this time to perhaps give us a little more insight. One thing which stands out is the role of his earthly father Joseph. This is the last section which informs us of Joseph's presence in Jesus' life. It is most likely that at some point between Jesus being 12 and 30 years old, that Joseph could have passed away. This may possibly be inferred during the account of the crucifixion when Jesus declares the Apostle John is to take care of Mary his mother. Since Jesus would have been the oldest of his brothers, the responsibility would have fallen to him to care for Mary, which seems to imply that Joseph is no longer present. We also can observe that Joseph was most likely a carpenter, and as was custom, most likely trained his son Jesus in the same trade. In Matthew's account we are told that Jesus is referred to as the carpenter's son, and in Mark's account Jesus is referred to as the carpenter. It is likely that during this early time of Jesus' life he may have been under the training of his earthly father Joseph in the same trade. Another thing we know about Jesus during this time is that he also had brothers and sisters. Both Matthew and Mark give accounts that Jesus had at least 4 younger brothers: James, Joses, Simon, and Judas. Mark makes mention of him having sisters as well. It is also generally believed that 2 of his brothers would later go on to write 2 of the epistles in the New Testament, the letters of James and Jude. I am often reluctant to try and fill in gaps in Jesus' life, and so even with the little information we have to make assumptions, we should be very careful so as not to add to the text. But whatever may have happened during this time, it seems that God wanted us to focus specifically on those parts of Jesus' life which the Gospels give us an account for. So, with that we will end this short overview of Jesus' early life, and next we will discuss the ministry of John the Baptist, the cousin of Jesus.